A lot of musicians spend the bulk of their time stressing over tactical questions. Should I post this? Should I run ads? Should I start a Patreon? How many singles should I release before the full album? And how many weeks apart should I space them? Should I ride a unicycle while juggling ukuleles? And don't get me wrong, tactics matter at a certain point, but they don't matter first, and they don't matter most. There is a much deeper question that we have to answer before any tactic is gonna work. And it's a question most musicians skip over, not because it's unimportant, but because answering it feels dangerous. In this episode, we're going to ask ourselves that dangerous question. Because you finding the kind of fans that actually stick around for more than just one song or one viral moment depends on your answer. Let's get into it. What's up? Welcome to Scratch Track. My name's Chris Robley, and at Demo, I work with very busy grown-up musicians juggling a lot in their life, but they still take their music seriously because they're still making great music. They just need to move it forward without having to chase trends, go broke, or burn out. If you want to start the next big adventure in your musical life, but you want to do it from a more solid foundation, check out Unbreakable. It's my artist identity framework that helps you figure out your purpose, your audience, your real magic as a musician, your messaging, and a content system that's perfect for you without you having to go burn a bunch of time and money experimenting and chasing strategies that really were never meant to work for you. To turn your listeners into lifelong fans with a future-proof artist brand, get started at musicdemo.org/unbreakable. All right, as a preamble for today's topic, I want to ask, do you know the story of the Little Mermaid? I mean, like, the real story, not the Disney movie. The dark fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, or is it Hans? It's not a happy ending. She doesn't get to stay human, she doesn't get the guy, and the sea witch actually cuts out her tongue. And in exchange for human legs, which actually are super painful for her to walk on, she sacrifices her voice and her ability to express who she truly is through singing. And in dimming herself that way, in making herself somewhat indistinct and unknowable, the prince falls in love with someone else, and the mermaid dies. There are a lot of lessons here. 1, don't make deals with witches. 2, fairy tales are depressing. 3, don't change who you are for the love of the prince. And maybe most importantly, if you change who you are, the prince isn't going to love you anyways. Now, what does any of this have to do with this big, dangerous question that you've been avoiding because you worry what the answer is going to mean for you? I think it'll become pretty clear in a second. And this super important question that if you're like most musicians, you've actually never answered, at least not honestly and clearly, it's foundational. And it's this: what do you actually believe? Not musically, not stylistically, not what genre are you, not how do you feel about your music once it's made. I mean, what do you believe about life? What is the worldview, the ethos, the core feelings that animate your music? What's that thing that isn't the music itself, but that can't help but seep into every aspect of your music? Whether you realize it or not, every artist has one. This kind of foundational conviction is sometimes called the quiet insistence, the North Star, the inner drumbeat, or as I like to call it, your noisy truth. And I put the noisy part in there on purpose to emphasize that this is not something you should keep quiet. When Walt Whitman published Leaves of Grass in 1855, critics called his poetry obscene and vulgar, egotistical. Whitman wrote very openly about the body and sexuality and working people. And he knew how some people might perceive the democratic spirit and that sprawling sense of freedom that was in his writing. Instead of being afraid, he brashly embraced it, rebelling against social mores and the formal constraints that most people expected of poetry of the age.
It's just not poetry.
And he even distilled this rebellion into a term or a phrase that appeared in one of his most famous poems. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. A barbaric yawp is the opposite of polite art. It's noisy, unfiltered, human, or animalistic. So today we'll dig in and ask, what is your barbaric yawp? What's your North Star? What is your noisy truth? Because if you don't consciously define it, your music marketing, the content you make, the ways you talk about your music to your audience will be a bit like throwing darts in the dark. Once in a while, sure, maybe you hit the bullseye, but you're just as likely to hit the poor bartender. Let me tell you a quick story and then I want to ask you a question. I was coaching an artist recently and she was struggling with how to share who she really was. She had seen hard things, she knew suffering was real, and here's the surprising part. Despite it all, she still really loved life. She still felt grateful, felt lucky. She still believed, despite it all, that we have it pretty good. And she wanted that gratitude to live inside her music. It was her worldview, her core ethos. Now imagine you're scrolling and you find her content. And let me give you 3 possible reactions to her music. You tell me which one is correct. Ugh, sentimental Pollyanna, keep your sunshine away from me. I like dark, brooding music. And the next person says this, "Oh, how dare you? There's so much suffering right now. Your gratitude reeks of privilege." And the third person says, "Wow, this made me feel a small moment of joy in the middle of all the doom scrolling." 3 pretty distinct responses. Now, which one is right?
And that's time.
Trick question. All of them. Even the angry ones. Because each person is being completely honest with how they relate or don't relate to her truth. But in our session, it became pretty clear that she was reluctant to articulate this truth. We'll talk about why in a second, but whenever she felt that truth surfacing really clearly in her music or the way she talked to her audience, she wasn't imagining the third person, the appreciative person, the one who resonated with her gratitude. She was thinking about the attitudes of the other 2 people. Her noisy truth made her uncomfortable because she worried how people would react to it. Maybe someone would think she's naive or worse, insensitive. And it was my job in that moment to say, no, if that truth feels noisy, don't mute it. And seriously, to hell with those other 2 people, because they're never going to be your true fans anyways. A strong artist identity does not try to win everyone over. It clarifies who you are for, and equally important, it clarifies who you are not for. A good brand repels on purpose. Now, I know that idea makes musicians nervous, because most artists, myself included, have these little people pleasers that are constantly running in our brains. It's like a little tiny PR manager living inside us, constantly whispering, maybe don't say that. What if someone misunderstands you? Oh, they might be offended. They might read this as sarcastic when you're being sincere, or they might think you're sincere when you're being sarcastic. Ooh, don't use that word. Don't share that post, or that thought, or that song. What a charming and encouraging voice, isn't it? Now, why do we hear this voice? Here's the psychology behind why artists mute themselves. It's called normative social influence, or more simply, conformity and compliance. Humans are hardwired to avoid rejection from the group. In evolutionary terms, exclusion from the tribe used to mean death. Like, quite literally, you get kicked out of the cave, you spend your nights alone in the woods now with the wolves who want to eat you. No warmth, no shelter, no food, no other people that you can lean on for shared skills. Judgment could mean exile, and exile meant death. All for having, slightly divergent opinions from the tribal elders, or acting in some novel way that just didn't comport with previous generations. Basically, you buck convention, you buck tradition, you're fucked. So our brains still treat social disapproval as an actual survival threat. Of course, in modern life, that's all out of whack with reality. And the tribe we're so afraid of offending today, they're just strangers on the internet. And yet we can tell ourselves rationally, oh, we don't care what they say. But we do, emotionally, chemically, we do. That's why negative comments stick around in our heads longer than praise. Criticism and disapproval feel physically uncomfortable to us, and that's why artists instinctively tend to soften their opinions. Your brain thinks it's protecting you. Thanks, brain, but no thanks, because it's actually keeping us stuck. But it's not all bad news. There's another psychological effect working in the opposite direction too. It's called the Pratfall effect. Pratfall effect is something that psychologists have studied where humans tend to show more trust and loyalty to respected experts and entertainers and politicians if they have some little blunder that shows they're human and fallible after all. We're more drawn to someone if they show imperfections. I don't mean like a hot mess, but imperfect. Now pair that with authenticity attraction, which is the idea that we are more drawn to people who have strong opinions than we are to someone who tries to appear universally polished. And we get this equation. Realness creates trust. Perfection creates distance. So ironically, the thing that we fear, being a little polarizing, because we think it's going to get us kicked out of the tribe, which means we die, is often what makes people connect with us more deeply. So we celebrate in others the very thing we're afraid to reveal in ourselves. Your nervous system wants safety. Your fans want bold, unapologetic truth. Your truth. Those two instincts, your safety and your truth, don't always agree. But since we don't live in a world of caves and jaguars, thankfully, you'll be fine. And in the struggle between your lagging evolutionary instincts and, sharing your truth, choose your truth. Easier said than done though, right? Because what do we tend to do as artists when we're afraid? We sand down our sharp edges. We smooth over the weird parts, dilute our convictions, try not to seem cringe. We become, artistically speaking, plain oatmeal. Nobody hates oatmeal, but nobody raves about it either. Here's some simple math. If everyone likes you, no one loves you. Because love requires specificity, recognition, loyalty. The feeling of, wait a minute, this artist sees the world the same way that I do. And the only way that that happens is when you say something clear enough to disagree with. Now, I'm not saying you should try to offend people just for the sake of offending them. I don't think your mission should be to be divisive. What I am saying is that the louder you live your truth, the more you won't be able to help but offend people. Even if we're talking about something as basic and stupid as someone being really angry at you for just being happy. Because there are millions of haters online with too much free time on their hands and too much bitterness in their hearts. And they would love to rain on your parade. Does that mean you shouldn't have a parade? A quick aside, if you feel like you've been trying on lots of marketing hats, trying lots of content ideas, and nothing has quite landed with the right listeners, you might be making one of 5 common branding mistakes. And I've got a quick guide to help you fix all 5. It's called Branding for Grown-Up Musicians, and you can get your copy at musicdemo.org/branding. Think about some artists who have actually mattered to you, ones that sometimes feel like they're speaking directly to you. Those artists usually have a very clear worldview. Bruce Springsteen believes in the dignity of ordinary people. Beyoncé believes you should never diminish your own power. Patti Smith believes that art is a sacred rebellion, where you free other people by freeing yourself. Phoebe Bridgers believes that introspection and irony can be the same thing. Kendrick Lamar believes that wit and honesty are required in the face of injustice. Billy Bragg believes that capitalism sucks. Neil Peart, well, he believes that collectivism sucks. Tom Waits believes in the poetry of failed dreams. Paul Simon believes that keen observation can unlock a kind of reverence for a God that he's not even sure is real. Bad Bunny believes that expression can be revolutionary without having to reject your origins. And I think of someone like Radiohead. Their worldview might be something like, modern life is alienating, but don't betray yourself to comfort. That truth obviously shows up in their lyrics, but also in this kind of disquieting way. They pursue disparate influences and they're constantly defying expectations. Now, can you imagine if Instagram existed when Radiohead made the leap from OK Computer to Kid A? If you're not a Radiohead fan, that was this really shocking time when they went from making anthemic guitar rock to this sort of cold, experimental sci-fi music full of synthesizers and bleeps and bloops and creepy ambient stuff. I guess if Instagram existed then, fans would have had 4 choices. Instantly love it, because they still recognize Radiohead's worldview, distinctly present in this new album, even though the music sounds completely different. Or 2, they could sit with their surprise and their discomfort and their disappointment long enough to work through it and realize how amazing this band's new direction actually is. 3, they'd just quietly go away. They'd resign and just be done with it and say, this new sound, not for me. We had some good years. Thanks very much. Or 4, they would have jumped right online, got in the comments and typed, WTF, this sucks. Where are the guitars? Could you imagine Radiohead reading those comments and then not doing something that they wanted to do musically? Just because some army of basement-dwelling trolls might say something mean in the comments? No, in this imaginary past, they still would have pulled off a dramatic sonic evolution that stayed true to their core ethos, even though the music sounded completely different. Whether you agree with that ethos or not is besides the point. What matters to us is that their music carries conviction. Now, here's where a lot of musicians go wrong. They assume their job is to be right, to have a reasonable take that makes space for all kinds of perspectives. But that's not your job. You're not writing a legal brief or moderating a debate. You're making art. Your job is not to be right according to other people's standards. Your job is to be real according to your own. Don't be right, be real. A minute ago, we looked at some core convictions that drive notable artists. But now let's imagine some artists who would feel totally ridiculous if they toned it down when it came to their core convictions. Imagine if Nick Cave didn't want to offend anyone. The music of Nick Cave often circles sin and violence and grief and death. But those aren't the core ideas unto themselves. It's not a horror movie. The deeper belief animating his music is something like human beings are broken, sinful creatures, but grace, love, and redemption still flicker in the darkness. That's a very old worldview. It's essentially like a biblical cosmology filtered through Gothic storytelling. And that's why his songs often feel like dark parables. But that, of course, means he has to use a lot of violence in his songs. What if he said, people who are triggered by violence or the very gendered nature of this cruelty, they might not like these grim murder ballads I keep singing. But if you take that kind of darkness out of his songs, you don't just lose the murder ballads, you lose the entire moral universe that lives inside his songs. Because that darkness is the lens through which he explores all the good stuff. Mortality, meaning, frailty, spirituality, connection, forgiveness, hope. Now, some people might call him insensitive for having that much cruelty in his music. But if they do, his music isn't for them. His entire artistic worldview, his noisy truth, involves bleak, biblical grief and cruelty. If you sanded all that away, you'd be left with, what, a mediocre lounge singer? People aren't just afraid to share their darkness, though. Let's imagine Weird Al Yankovic, whose noisy truth might be something like, life is absurd, so you just shouldn't take yourself too seriously. What if he decided he wanted more people to like him? Because parody and polka and fart noises, costumes, and silly lyrics are all just childish. So in this example, depending on whatever hang-ups and voices of doubt he already has, Weird Al might feel a whole lot safer being normal Al, because being weird is immature, unmanly, irresponsible, unserious, untrustworthy. Now, normal Al is just a forgettable cover song singer with a nasally voice, instead of a badass musical and comedic genius. Imagine Rage Against the Machine without the rage against the machine. With that band, the distortion, the aggression, they are expressions of a deeper belief. Their underlying worldview is essentially power concentrates, power corrupts, and ordinary people have got to resist it. Now that ethos draws from anti-authoritarian politics, anti-imperialism, anti-capitalist critique, and revolutionary solidarity. Are they worried what the supply-side economists think? Are they worried that the foreign policy hawks are going to be offended? That being political is going to ostracize some of their fans? No, the music sounds explosive because their worldview is explosive. If they soften that belief, the band wouldn't just sound different. They'd lose the moral engine that drives their music. One last quick example here. What if Kurt Cobain thought one day, maybe I should make sure the jocks and the misfits both feel equally comfortable? Now Nirvana suddenly sounds like a Pepsi commercial. The artists we often admire the most are the ones who've made peace with being misunderstood. Sometimes they've even made peace with being offensive. So the pattern is probably becoming clear. Your sound, your production style, your aesthetic, your genre, your lyrics, those are outward expressions. The noisy truth is a belief system driving that expression. If you mute or sanitize what lies underneath the music is going to suffer too. And the way you promote your music is also going to lose depth and integrity. If someone just magically banned you from using your usual musical style, would the core belief behind your music still exist? Like, if you used to make English folk rock, but now suddenly you're forced to make a big band swing with vocals, would your core ethos shine through? If the answer is yes, you might have already found your noisy truth. But here's a word for midlife or older artists. It might seem like a lot of the artists I've used in this episode as examples had already clarified a kind of palpable noisy truth from a young age. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. They did. Part of their success probably depended on that palpable articulation of their ethos, which I suppose is just a fancy way of saying they had their brand figured out very early on. But there's no rule that says you can't articulate an ethos at any age. You might now have the wisdom and perspective of someone with years to your credit. And as you get older, you might care less and less about what people actually think of you. So you finally feel the permission to be real and loud and imperfect. Which reminds me of The Velveteen Rabbit. A story about a toy that only becomes real through love and wear. But the rabbit's transformation is not glamorous. As another character has to tell the rabbit, generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. That's actually a perfect metaphor for mature artists. Being real makes you less polished, but far more meaningful. And if there are people who understand your truth and people who don't understand your truth, then maybe your truth is subjective? Yeah, sure. Okay, let's say reality is subjective. Then it's your reality, specific, honest, personal, full of conviction, that might speak to someone else's reality and create resonance. Let me put it this way. Imagine two different artists posting online. Artist number one says, "My new song is about life's ups and downs. Hope you enjoy." Okay. Maybe that's technically true. It's a song. I might enjoy it. Life does have ups and downs. It's also about as emotionally gripping as a quarterly earnings call. Now imagine the second artist says something like this. "I wrote this song because small town life can feel like a beautiful prison." Or, "I wrote this song because you shouldn't wait until you retire to enjoy the rest of your life." Now suddenly people feel something. Some might agree, some might not. Some will argue, some will scroll right on past. But a small group will stop and say, "Wait, that's exactly how I feel." Those are your people. Those are your truest fans. The artists who matter often go too far in the eyes of someone. Your noisy truth is dangerous because when you follow your conviction instead of the crowd's comfort, you stop being safe. You're prone to judgment and critique and rejection. But also, you've now got enough definition to be loved. For those truest fans, too far is just right. So here's a question I want you to wrestle with. Is there a part of your story you're muting? a belief you keep muffled because it might rub someone the wrong way, something you've been turning down in your own internal mix. That thing might actually be gold when it comes to you building an audience. Because when you define your noisy truth, everything else gets easier. Your messaging gets clear, your content stops feeling like random, awkward promotion. It starts feeling like an extension or a translation of something you already are or something you already feel. This is actually the first major step in the framework that I teach inside Unbreakable. Because before we talk about content strategies and themes, before we even talk about your audience, we've got to define the noisy truth. If you're choosing tactics before you decide your identity, it's like turning up static on an untuned radio. But when you know what you stand for, promotion becomes much simpler. Not easy, but easier, more focused. Now it's like taking that same radio dial, tuning it first so the signal is super clear, and then turning up the volume. This kind of clarity is the difference between being a midlife or older musician who just at some point gets sick of it, burning out, slowly quitting because nothing feels like it ever sticks, and being the kind of artist where small steps accumulate into actual mileage and you build something that lasts. So here's a small challenge I want to leave you with today. Write one sentence, just one, and finish this statement. My music exists because I believe what? Not what you think people want to hear, not what you think makes you look impressive or cool, but what you actually believe. And that sentence might scare you a little bit once you see it back, and if so, that's good because it means you're being vulnerable. The thing you're saying is probably important to you, and then starts triggering that fear that you're going to be judged for it. So you're getting really close to what matters most. If you want help uncovering your noisy truth, that's exactly what we do inside Unbreakable, figuring out what makes you unique as a musician, and then turning that identity into a sustainable content creation process. So your promotion helps you reach the right listeners without eating up your entire life. If you want my help uncovering what makes you unmistakable as an artist, get started at musicdemo.org/unbreakable. And until next time, remember, you don't need to be liked by everyone. You just need to be unmistakable to the loyal few who are waiting to hear exactly what you have to say. And I'll see you next time. Peace.